All right, it is indeed a very, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It is the 31st of March 2023. Tarehe 31 mwezi wa 3 mwaka 2023. Natumai kwamba uko salama, umeamka vizuri and you're ready to tackle it for this Friday. Thank God it's Friday. Nairobi is very cold. Kuna baridi sijui mahali ulipo, mambo vipi? How is the traffic situation as well on your roads this morning? Please let us know where you're watching us from this morning. And as usual, the journey place like when you like, we get to know that you're watching us. That please share. When you share, you give someone else an opportunity to watch the broadcast. This is a tackle, the State of the Nation edition of the 1st of March 2023, and it begins right now. Kama kawaida, ukiingia please like, ukilike unajua kama unatazama, na ukisha like tafadhali share, ukishare unampa mtu mwingine nafasi ya kuweza kutazama broadcast ya leo. Friday normally is usually Sharia wiki, but I think the nation is a state where we need to keep talking about the state of the nation, state of the economy, state of the social fabric, state of us as Kenyans, state of siasa, state of everything. There's a lot that's happening in this country. A lot is going on. A lot is going on. All right, but it's a pleasure to have you this morning as usual. When you please like, when you like, we get to know that you're watching us, and please share. When you share, you give someone else an opportunity to watch the broadcast. This morning, you want to look at the state of the economy and also look at the state of KQ. KQ just recently announced a 38 billion loss. Okay, not that it's news, but the news is it keeps going up. The loss keeps going up against. Do we ever have profits? Have we ever had profits? Anyway, we get to look at that this morning. Leo Khafafa will give us a perspective into that as well. What exactly has been happening with Kenya Airways, and what are some of the recommendations that we could have to ensure that we can reverse the trend at Kenya Airways. KQ, the ever landing plane. Ever landing. It's never taking off. Kama kawaida, tunameleza Mungu tuombe tukirudi na kuja kuona nani ameweza kuamka. Mighty Father, we come before you this morning. We worship you, glorify your name. Thank you for another opportunity to be alive. We used to thank you for this program. We thank you for this conversation that you're about to have. As we start off, may you be with us, and as we have this conversation, may it edify the fabric of this country. For every tackler who's joining in, may you meet them at their point of individual needs. For we pray, trusting and believing. Amen. Haya, asante sana. It's dawn official. Bei ya kila kitu imepanda, lakini Mungu hajapandisha bei ya oxygen. Praise God. Haya, sifiwe sana. Jesse Emmanuel, good morning to tackle. Long time my great neighbor. Good to see you, Jesse. K.E. Pato, good morning to tackle. What's happening in Kenya? It's becoming more complicated. It's us, the common mwananchi, who is suffering. High cost of living, high taxation, no jobs. What the hell? I don't know what's happening as well. But as you can see, I think a lot of us know what is happening. And as usual, it's the contest between the political class and the people who remain at the center. Unajua Swahili walisema vita wakati fahali wawili wanapigana ni kitu ambayo inaumia inaitwa nyasi. So nyinyi ndio nyasi, vumilieni kidogo, and we get to see what can happen. But I think a lot of the decision rests in your personal capacity. If you don't want to be part of the things that you're seeing happening around yourself, you can make that decision as well. Kama ni maandamano utaki kwenda, unaweza kaa usiende. Kama unataka kwenda, you can go. You can decide to disturb the life of your neighbor. You can decide to destroy property, but you can also decide to be peaceful. Again, this is a country that is governed by the rule of law, and we have a constitution that defines all the lines and all the boundaries for those who want to participate and those who don't want to participate. Where does it end? Where does it begin? Kipchichir AK, good morning. Gerald Bitok, good morning to you and good to see you. Collins Kipsad, good morning team, good morning. Daniel, good morning and good to see you this morning. All right, as we allowed to call Leonard Khafafa, who is a public policy analyst and aviation consultant, and we have Michael Otieno, Oloo, governance and public policy expert. Both of them are new on the tackle. It's their first time on the tackle, but I have known them on different capacities. Good morning to you, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Leo, Jambo.
Jambo.
Uko salama?
Niko salama kabisa.
Good to see you again.
And you. Yeah, and you.
How are things like?
Everything is good. Yeah.
Everything?
Well, most things as good as they can possibly be at this particular time, juncture in time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Michael, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, good to see you.
It's your first time, eh?
It's my first time here. It's interesting.
Is it? All right. Maybe you can take just a minute to introduce yourself to the viewers.
Yeah, so good morning, viewers. My name is Michael Otieno. I'm a governance and public policy expert, particularly looking at various issues around public investments, public participation, involvement of citizens in various aspects of governance. As well as, of course, regional and continental issues around public policy and governance. So basically, that's where I am.
Okay, that's the space that you're operating from. All right. Also, Leo, maybe you can introduce yourself to the viewers.
Yeah, I'm Leo Khafafa. I'm a public policy analyst and an aviation consultant. So I'm a columnist as well. So basically, what I do is look at public policy, break it down to levels that Mwananchi can understand through my column and through engagements such as this.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming this morning. It's a pleasure to host you, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you this morning. All right. Karen Tuguda, good morning, Takol family. Good morning to you, Paul Kosgei. Good morning, Gerald Bitok, and their Takol family. Have a blessed weekend. Good to see you, and it's Good Friday to you. State of the Nation edition, KQ, the ever landing flight. No. Let's look at the background of, help us understand the background of KQ. Hii kitu ilianzianga wapi? Ilitoka wapi kwanza?
KQ was profitable at some point in time. I think after a lot of, around the time it was privatized, all the way to 2010, 2011, 2012, then it ran into headwinds. But there's a reason why it ran into headwinds. One, they got into an expansion drive, which was necessary at that time.
When was this?
That was around 2010, 2011, 2012, all the way. It was necessary for them to expand because in aviation, big is beautiful. When you have a big airline, it's needful. Small has its disadvantages, so they needed to scale up, basically to cover multiple routes within Africa and out of Africa. So that expansion drive ran into headwinds, partly as a result of bad luck or bad timing and some decisions that also affected them at that particular time. Bad luck, let me talk about the bad luck that KQ ran into. One, they ordered 787 aircraft to replace their aging fleet of 767 and Boeing's 777. Those were aging, they were old. The in-flight entertainment systems were not current. They had served well, but they needed to renew their fleet. Passengers can be very fickle. They look at whatever is new on board, the fitting, the cabin refurbishment, the onboard entertainment. So they needed to do that. So they ordered 787 Dreamliners as a replacements for their aging fleet. And there was an issue. There was a delay in their delivery. In fact, Kenya was meant to have been the launching ground for Africa for the 787s. But because of those delays from the side of Boeing, we missed out on that. And that delay affected our ability, Kenya Airways' ability to fly. Then other things, now there were other external factors that were beyond the control of Kenya Airways. For instance, in around 2010, 2011, thereabouts, I think West Africa had Ebola. There was the Ebola crisis, and the Ebola crisis affected a significant section of our market because a lot of KQ's market was West African, was based in West Africa. You're talking of Nigeria, you're talking of Ghana and the likes. So when Ebola happened, KQ was unable to fly to that particular destination, and it affected KQ's performance revenue-wise. Then shortly after that, you had the war in Central African Republic that cut yet another significant portion of KQ's travel market. Then you had 2013, I believe, there was the Westgate attack, terrorist attack, that led to adverse travel advisories from the West. So it affected our out-of-continent travel quite a lot, Our markets like Paris, that's France, or markets like the UK. At that time, I think we were doing Italy, we were doing Germany. So all those external markets were affected by that. So those are some of those external factors that affected the KQ. Then the airport burnt down at some point. You remember the old arrivals terminal, the entire unit burnt down. It led to difficulties, in operational difficulties. People started avoiding KQ for that reason. So there are multiple reasons beyond the control of KQ that happened that made it now run into debt. So KQ's problem right now, I don't know whether I'm jumping the gun, but let me just say that KQ's problem is the debt that arose as a result of that multiplicity of problems. We call it a legacy debt. A legacy debt in the sense that it's a debt that was taken by a different management under different circumstances when priorities were different at that time, and that is still having impact on the balance sheet of the airline to the moment, that legacy debt. If you retire that debt, KQ's problems go away overnight. So in a nutshell, those are KQ's, that is the genesis of KQ's problems, and that is what continues to hamper KQ's operations to date.
Okay. And you come back, I think we need to look, before, back beyond and before 2010. I talk about when the crisis began at KQ and how long it has taken, of course, for them to figure out a recovery. But before I throw in that same question to you, my brother Michael, I would want to know, what's your what do you think is the state of the nation? What's your feeling of the nation?
That's a fairly broad question, but I think to summarize it in a concise way is that I think it remains precarious. Let me use that word. Precarious in the sense that we have a multiplicity of challenges that citizens are facing. A lot of them are economic. Some of them are political. But the reality is that people eventually look at bread and butter issues. And when there is a challenge with the bread and butter issues, the rest of the things become immaterial. I give you an example. I mean, last year, one would buy 2 kg of beans at 250. Today, the same quantity would not go for anything less than 350. In certain cases, even 400 shillings. Which means the cost of living has doubled. Comparatively, income has remained largely the same in terms of real value income. It has actually gone down because of global issues that have to do with exchange rates and things like that. So I think the basis of public, what I would call the public situation in general, lies with resolving the economic challenges. But of course, economic challenges are directly linked to political challenges. You can't separate the two. Sometimes when you have economic problems, you often reflect them or publicly reflect them as political issues. So I think the economic challenges are a real problem for ordinary citizens, and that is one issue that requires immediate attention at all levels. In addition to that, of course, we've seen historically, I would want to call it a cycle of political upheavals that come immediately after elections. And of course, that also is a serious concern, because certain times the political upheavals have a direct link with the economic challenges. So a collectively addressing these problems, I think, is a key issue that we need to look at as a nation. Otherwise, we may end up with very tense society, and a tense society oftentimes leads to individuals and groups that have nothing to lose. And there is nothing as dangerous as dealing with people that have nothing to lose. Because in any case, whether they're alive or not is
insignificant.
It's a question of choosing how you die, as one person said it at some point, but the end result remains the same. And addressing that problem has to begin with the economic challenges and the political issues that we're talking about.
Okay. Looking further, even beyond the borders of the country, locally we've been having issues with the dollar and the fluctuating the trade health between the Kenya shillings and the dollar. And in the recent days, within the week, there has been conversations from other countries for instance, look at China, look at Russia, and they are saying we want to move away from the dollar. And we are looking at a complete overhaul of global economy, because for the longest time, the global economy has run on the dollar in terms of exchange and trade. Now, these countries are moving away from the dollar. Russia has actually declared that China, they're going to deal with yuan, Chinese yuan in trading with each other. We've also seen African countries which are beginning to take a stand against the dollar. And I remember the president, the campaign, William Ruto, around 2 weeks ago, he made a statement. He said that if you're holding dollars, you better release them, because in a couple of weeks, the market will be very, very different and you will be making losses. Now, on this perspective, what exactly is the state of the global economy, and why are we experiencing this cash crisis? Leo?
There's been that movement away from, there's been a drive for a very long time, it's not the first time actually, that there's been a drive to move away from the dollar as a medium of exchange, as a store of value. Yeah, basically what a currency does. There's been that drive, particularly from China. There are some countries that have also resorted to storing. They are backing their currency, not with the dollar, but with the gold, actually. So there's been that drive. It's not something that is new, but I don't think it's going to be overnight. The transition from a dollar to other currencies or to other standards is not going to be an overnight thing. The world trades in dollars. Most of the world knows dollars as the global medium of exchange. I mean, look at the airline industry, for instance. Tickets, even KQ tickets, are sold in terms of dollars. They're not really sold in terms of Kenya shillings. The conversion is done here, but when the prices are advertised, they're advertised in terms of dollars. So I don't think that shift is going to be immediate. It's going to be long-term. And yes, there's a shift. But coming closer home, I think the reason why the president spoke of releasing dollars that people were holding is because of the interventions that he has done as a government. One, he has gotten into an arrangement with the Saudi Aramco, that's an oil company, and the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, to supply Kenya with oil on credit terms for about 6 months. And the reason why he's done that is because oil, the petroleum products that we use here in the country, make a huge demand on our dollar reserves. And usually it happens like in one instance, when people are purchasing, when companies, oil marketers are purchasing for the needs of the country, they mop up whatever is in the market and make those purchases in lump sum. So it leads to it leads to demand for the greenback. And that demand for the greenback then ensures that the supply of it in the market is curtailed, and it causes our Kenya shilling to depreciate as a result. The other intervention that is taken is, and that is not really being talked about, is with regard to the new central bank deputy governor who came in and who reached out to banks that had been holding dollars because of distrust among them. We had the old interbank arrangement. There's an interbank relationship that banks have with each other where they sell each other dollars that had sort of been put aside for some reason or the other. But the central bank, the new deputy governor who's come in to central bank, has managed to get all the bankers together, and she's gotten them talking. She's gotten the trust between them going. She's actually backing that trust with her office as a central bank deputy governor. And the result is instantaneous. You can see now banks are releasing dollars, trading with each other, and the result is that there is an influx of dollars into the market with positive consequences. The Kenya shilling is gaining, or more or less stable now, against the dollar. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, it was out in the bureaus. If you went to the bureaus, you'd buy the dollar at about 144, 145 shillings. But now, if you go to the bureau right now, you'll get it for about 130. And the interbank rates are, of course, even lower than that. Yeah, so those are some of those interventions that the president has taken and that have positive results.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Michael, what do you think about the shift and what does it mean, even for economy and the global economy? What does this shift mean?
I think I would look at it from two perspectives. First is globally. You know, the banking sector is a very volatile sector because, you know, banks don't produce money, you know, and money is more of, in a layman's term, I would call it a perception. I mean, if you're given a piece of paper and you call it $1, it is only worth what you think it is worth. But if for any reason something happens and someone says it's no longer worth what it is, then you will see a fairly big shift in terms of the value of the currency. And historically, currencies have been different things at different times. I think it is for the longest time that we have had paper currency, you know, but I'm sure you remember historically at some point, even salt was currency. You know, you would exchange salt with something else.
Better trade.
You know, gold, was, you know, so anything can be currency. But in this context, the point I wanted to make at a global level is that because of that uncertainty that has arisen over the last 1 year or so, if I were to say, and that has eventually ended up in the recent, I think over the last 1 month, we've seen a run-in on banks, particularly in the United States and Europe, you know, the collapse of the SVB, you know, the Silicon Valley Bank in America, and other smaller banks around it, the near collapse of Credit Suisse in Switzerland, that was eventually just bailed out by a partner bank, you know, creates the impression that the global financial system is unstable, you know. So technically, we may be heading back to 2008 scenario, where we faced a similar challenge. And given that circumstance, you know, if you bring it back to the African continent and Kenya in particular, I think the only advantage we have is that we are not as integrated in the global economy as the rest of the world. And therefore, the effect of that global uncertainty may take a bit of time to have an effect on our economy. But for countries that are very much integrated with the global economy, you begin to see a systematic shift towards bilateral agreements. So Japan, for instance, getting into an agreement with Brazil on using domestic currencies for exchange. China with Russia, you know, Russia with South Africa. I think the latest one that I saw yesterday is now that the Japanese are requiring Kenyans to pay for imports, particularly for cars in yen, which I think would have a very big effect on the value of the dollar, because we import a lot of cars from Japan. So, and because of that, I think we may need to look at it progressively in terms of the long term rather than immediate. It may not have an immediate effect on the value of the Kenya shilling, but eventually, you know, these interventions, both domestic interventions that he was talking about, as well as the global realities of the reduction in the over-reliance on the dollar in itself, will eventually have an effect on the Kenya shilling. But to expand the argument a little bit, you know, the war in Ukraine has had a very significant impact, both globally and domestically in Kenya. Globally, in the sense that Russia, alongside with its allies, have taken up that opportunity, you know, because of the sanctions that have been imposed against Russia and the effect that it is having on Russia's partners, you know. They have taken that opportunity to challenge the global financial system. So we are beginning to see countries developing their own unique exchange mechanisms, you know. For example, if you look at Russia, okay, if you take Russia, China, and India, there has been, over the last 1 year, there has been an attempt to shift from using
USD.
The USD, you know, and also to shift from using Visa, for instance, as a mechanism of virtual transfer of money. And the intent, if you look at it from an outsider's perspective, is to try and create a parallel system. Now it is not necessarily entirely an economic issue. In my opinion, I think it is a political issue. Global economic circumstances are in most cases dependent on the political interests of competing global powers. I would hasten to say that from 1989, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we've had a fairly dominant America. I would not even want to say West, because even Europe is technically very dependent on US support, both politically and in most cases economically. From that time, for up to about a decade ago, there wasn't any significant challenge to this dominance. Now, the reality from a decade ago is that we are beginning to see a fairly aggressive China.
Rest of the East.
And the aggressive China is not aggressive for their own interest. They are also aggressive for global interest, The fastest growing economy, the biggest market for most countries in the world. For instance, even America, for example, the American economy is almost, to a very large extent, dependent on the Chinese economy in terms of production. You remember during Trump's time, one of his issues at that time was, how do we bring back American investment into our country? The reason they had been exporting consistently American investment to China. Of course, there may have been reasons for that. One of them is that the cost of production is fairly cheaper in China, and therefore you'd rather produce in China and export back to America, But the reality of it is that by doing that, you've actually exported the labor. You've also exported technology. And the Chinese have been very smart at it. They have taken advantage of that to develop their own parallel economy. So, for instance, the dominance of American manufacturing, the dominance of European manufacturing, is consistently now overtaken by Chinese dominance in manufacturing. A lot of European manufacturing is also being done in China. It may be a European product, yes, but it's
made in China.
It's actually made in China. For that reason, and China is taking advantage of this at two levels. One, to build their own technological dominance, as well as to use that leverage to, I wouldn't want to say manipulate, but to try and control the global political situation in that case. So, and I think that is the reason for a fairly long time China has had a lot of focus on the African continent. The African continent, for the simple reason that a lot of natural resources, are in Africa. And he who controls these natural resources then has the opportunity to control the entire world. And that has been the basis of European dominance over the years. It has been the basis of American dominance over the years. And Chinese have simply learned what they have been doing
from the Americans and the West. Do you have anything to add on that?
I think Mike has been fairly comprehensive in the way he has responded. Yeah, I agree. I largely agree with what he said.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, coming back home again, yesterday the president attended American Chamber of Commerce meeting. There has been conference. Is it conference or workshop? I don't know. That has been going on for the last 3 days, I think. And he has made a raft of declarations. He made a raft of declarations therein. One of them is the removal of the 30% ownership rule on foreign companies. This is what happens when you come in as a foreigner into Kenya. When you're registering a company or a business that you want to run, the law requires and demands that you give 30% shares or 30% ownership to a local entrepreneur or a local citizen, right? If I am Patel, coming from India, coming up to set up a pharmaceutical company, I am required by law to give to either Mike or Leo 30% ownership on the investment on the company. Now, the president yesterday said that that law could be reversed. I'm not sure whether it was bilateral between America and Kenya or it's a blanket declaration. But then again, we can look at it at that level because the biggest investments actually for the longest time has come in from America in terms of business and companies that are running within the country. Another one is, of course, the issues of tax reliefs on companies and tax refunds that will come on investments that have been made by, of course, by American businessmen. Another one would be tax exemption on startups. That the people who are coming in doing startups and all that, they left some level of tax relief, tax exemptions, and tax holidays as they start up their businesses to give them a good start as they kick off. Now, there's been fears, if you read around, there have been fears about, of course, the security of investments that are coming, issues of taxes. Are we getting money from these people? They will only be doing business, they're not paying us taxes and taking back the money to America. Another issue, the issues of profit. Is it another case of profit lifting? And these are actually, the Chinese have mastered this art of lifting capital and profit, especially when you look at the SGR and the other projects, major projects that are being done within the country. As much as they have been done on loans that we are paying, most of them, they come in with the money. The money does not even sit anywhere within the bank, comes in the money. The money is spent directly on the project, or even materials are imported into the country directly. And the only money that maybe gets to be retained is on labor basis. But most of the money, the profits and the capital and all that, goes back to China, go back to Exim Bank, straight away. Aingia hata equity hapa kidogo, mimi ni member. Inatoka, inaenda China. Now, some of those recommendations, policy recommendations, what do you guys make of them? What do you make of it, Leo?
Well, I think what the president intends is to attract FDI, that is foreign direct investment, by some of these incentives that he appears to be giving to the Americans. Okay. And foreign direct investment is good when foreign companies set up here, employ locals. You have what is called a technology transfer, you know. The Americans come with their technology, the locals tap into that technology, of course, and they learn how to work things or learn how to come up with local solutions for local problems based on the technology that they're receiving. So that's one of the benefits of foreign direct investment. And of course, the other is the creation of jobs. The downside is that, as you've mentioned, the repatriation of profits. Yes. Yeah, so that can be a bit thorny when we have to repatriate all our profits 100%, as the policy changes that the president announced seem to suggest. But I wouldn't be too worried for now, because a policy pronouncement by a political figure is one thing. Implementation is a totally different thing. And implementation is done by the technocrats. They are the ones who sit at the back, you know, and decide how laws are going to be changed or amended, whatever is taken to Parliament, or how it ought to be taken, or whatever the decision that they come up with, how it is harmonized with Kenyan law. And there are many stakeholders, you know. We have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs involved, the Ministries of Trade, the state law offices, all of these working to make sure that whatever the president has said is not to the detriment of Kenyans. So for that reason, I wouldn't be too worried. We wait to see. I would actually wait to see the policy papers that come out, interrogate them. When we interrogate those, when they've come out, that is when we will get to know whether we have been sold wholesale or whether there is a benefit for the people of Kenya. But for now, I wouldn't be too worried.
You're not be worried.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you worried, Michael? Oh.
Yeah. Yes and no. Yeah, no, because let me start with the easier one. No, because what we know for now is probably a one-paragraph statement by His Excellency the President. Until we access the details.
But the documents which are signed.
Yes, you see the document was signed, but they are only known to the people that signed them. You know? So until we know what was signed, I think for now we will have to be optimistic, but also pessimistic on the other side. But two things that I want to point out. One, tax. Let me explain it from a slightly technical perspective. Tax is a tool for different things. One is to generate revenue.
Okay.
2 is to control consumption. And 3, which I think is very important, is a means of accountability. Of course, there are other issues around it. A means for accountability, because you remember the American independence cry of no taxation without representation. You know, and I think for me that is the basis of why I could be worried, because if we introduce a tax regime without involving the people that actually pay the tax, then it may not be in their interest. 2, when we look at factor number 2 that I mentioned, factor number 1 on raising revenue, if the tax regime is designed in such a way that instead of raising revenue, you are actually losing revenue, then in itself it is inherently bad. And that's why I was saying, probably need to get the details first, you know. Let me give you an example. Multinational corporations are fairly smart entities. There is no multinational corporation that is inherently philanthropic. In other words, there is no investor, there is no capitalist that will tell you, I like you so much, I want to invest in your country, I will create for you jobs, I will make for you profit, and I will give it to you. It never works that way. Multinational corporations are guided and controlled by profit motive. How much money am I going to make if I invest in your country? Now, one of the easiest ways to make profit is to actually avoid paying tax. And if you can do that legally, you know, if you can do that in such a way that it allows you not to contravene any legislation, any policy, or any constitutional requirement, then it is even better for them. And most multinational corporations will always move towards or invest in locations where they have that advantage. Take, for instance, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is an American company. But Coca-Cola is not registered in the US. Coca-Cola is registered in Ireland. Reason, the tax regime there is much more favorable. It is far less for them to, they'll pay much less if they are Irish than if they are American, you know. Facebook, a very common social media platform, is American. We know it is American. But it is not registered as an American company. It is an Irish company, for the simple reason that the tax regime allows them to save a lot of money. Now, the policy pronouncement that we are talking about, for me, if the details allows the multinational or the foreign investors to repatriate profit, fully, like my colleague was saying, 100% repatriation. If it allows them a loophole to shift profits, and shifting profits in the sense that, for instance, let me use an example. If I do my business in Kenya, but I'm registered, say, in the Cayman Islands, where the tax rate is, say, 2%, hypothetically, and in Kenya the tax rate is 35%. If I'm registered in the Cayman Islands and I make my money in Kenya, my residency in terms of tax obligation will be in the Cayman Islands. So if Kenya has an agreement with the Cayman Islands, a tax agreement with the Cayman Islands, it means Kenya will not tax this corporation. It is the Cayman Islands that will tax the corporation. Then it leads to a net loss. And this is why I was talking about, you may introduce a tax policy with the intention of raising revenue, but you actually lose revenue. You know, so the arrangement in terms of the agreements that were signed between Kenya and the American investors, you know, needs to be clear to the extent that, one, where is the business resident? Will the business be resident in Kenya, and therefore Kenya has the tax mandate over this investment, or will the business be a subsidiary of a corporation that is resident in another tax jurisdiction? And in most cases, even some of these companies that we call American companies, of course we know them publicly as American companies, but if you look at where they're registered, they're actually registered in tax havens. You know, the small tax jurisdictions that they don't produce anything, and therefore they depend on more people investing in, or sometimes you don't even have to invest, you just need to file your papers there. for tax purposes, So unless we are clear on how that arrangement is done, I think we need to throw in a bit of caution, because we may end up putting pressure on Kenya Revenue Authority to raise 3 trillion Kenya shillings in taxes, and on the other hand, we are actually limiting Kenya Revenue Authority's power to be able to raise that money, So you demand on the one hand, but you don't facilitate, the authority to be able to raise the sufficient taxes that we are talking about. So the details of the agreement, I think, is particularly important. On the issue of 30% ownership, I think my only concern with it would be the question of to what extent does it allow for emergence of domestic entrepreneurship, domestic production, and domestic manufacturing, because I think when that limit was put through a legislation, the Privatization Act, the intention was to be able to nurture domestic investment, so that if there are certain qualifications, for lack of a better word, that the Kenyan investor does not have, if there are certain expertise that the Kenyan investor does not have, then they can learn from the foreign investors, and then eventually the Kenyan investor becomes, much more proficient in terms of doing business. Now, if you eliminate that, then it means there is no obligation for any foreign company to nurture domestic entrepreneurship, for that matter. And technically, we are basically saying it's a free-for-all investment. As long as you have money, please bring it on board. We don't mind who owns it. But as I said, the caution lies in what are the details. For now, I would want to be optimistic that our leaders are conscious of the fact that every state exists to protect the interest, its own interest. There is no philanthropy between interstate relations. There is no goodness. There is no, there is no state that will help you because
they like you.
They like you. They like themselves first. Then, if by some chance they can like you in the process, then good enough.
But there has to be a gain in it. Yeah. There has to be a rider. All right, okay. We get back to Kenya Airways, and I would like you, Leo, to take us briefly through this year's financial report. What does it say? What are the details in it?
There's a lot that was unstated about this year's financial reports. Let me start by saying this. Different newspapers had different reporting styles.
Okay.
Some reported shocking headlines, 38 billion shillings loss. Some gave a more accurate picture of the situation that obtains currently at KQ, which is that KQ is turning around. Their operating loss has reduced. For the half year, that is up to August last year, it had reduced by 14%. As for the full year, there has been a reduction of operating loss of 17%. That is from 6.83 billion shillings last year, that is the financial year 2021, to 5.616 billion shillings in 2022. That's an improvement. Income has also grown by a 59% increase. That is from 116 billion 767. That is from 70 billion 222 in 2021 to 116 billion 767 in 2022. Customer numbers have grown by 68% to 3.7 million passengers last year. That is 2022. So there's also what you call the passenger available seats per kilometer, a factor, one of those indices that indicate growth, and it's registering very favorable numbers. So KQ has grown. Now back to the results, that we saw on the 38%, the 38.8 billion shilling loss. What wasn't properly stated is the fact that most of that loss was a paper loss. That is 18 billion shillings was a paper loss. So what's a paper loss? I can give you an example of somebody who purchases a house, say for 20 million shillings, Kenya shillings. You know, home ownership is a big thing in Kenya. So we know what we are all talking about when I talk of somebody who's aspired and is put his purchase of 20 million shillings towards a house, paid up for it, and the house at that moment is worth 20 million shillings. Then, by dint of maybe war or famine or whatever, or a bubble burst or whatever, the value of that house drops to, say, 14 million shillings. So the person now, the house on paper becomes worth 14 million shillings because that's the value of the house in the market. But so there is a loss of about 6 million shillings on account of the value dropping from 20 million to 14 million shillings. But that loss is not realized. That loss of 6 million shillings is not realized until that house is sold. When you sell the house, then the loss of 6 million shillings is realized. But as long as you don't sell the house, there's no loss. It's a paper loss. Okay. And chances are things turn around and the value of the house goes back to 20 million. At the point of selling, then you've not made any loss. So that, let me relate that now to the KQ facility. The KQ results and what I'm talking about, that the 18 billion shillings was a paper loss. KQ borrowed money to buy its 787 planes and an engine, I think around 2017 thereabouts. Mm-hmm. And the repayments for the aircraft and the engine were predicated on the revenues that KQ receives from the sale of its tickets, from its cargo business. So everything was okay. Then 2020, we got COVID. I mean, COVID affected the airlines all over the world. And for a period of about a year and a half, KQ did not fly. So there were no revenues. But the loan, part of the loan fell due, installments of the loan fell due in 2021, 2022. And KQ then, not having revenues, talked to the government. Now, one of the things is that the government was one of the guarantors of that loan. Mm-hmm. The loan was from the American Exim Bank, okay, and guaranteed in part by the Kenya government. So KQ talked to the government and asked it to cover its part of the guarantee of the loan, pay a couple of installments on behalf of KQ in a process called novation, where the government steps in, pays the Americans, that's the Exim Bank, then KQ then pays the government from its revenues. Now, that's okay. That's exactly what happened. But international financial reporting standards required that KQ reports the money as a borrowing from a shareholder. There are standards of accounting, international financial reporting standards. So when that money when KQ paid, when that government advanced that money on lend to KQ for settlement of its debt with the American Exim Bank, it had to be reported in the KQ financials. Ordinarily, the repayment of KQ loans is a liability that appears on the balance sheet of the company. But because the financial reporting standards required it to be reported, it was reported under the profit and loss account of KQ. And that reporting is in Kenya shillings. Had KQ paid the loan from its revenues, there would have been no loss whatsoever. Why? Because KQ's receipts, a lot of KQ's receipts are in dollars. So when it has a dollar loan, it pays from the receipts, the money it receives, and those dollars act as a natural hedge around the finances of KQ. But because it was required to report that borrowing as an advance from a shareholder in the profit and loss account, it had to be reported in Kenya shillings. But now, remember that at the point KQ was taking that facility, the dollar was at about, between 75 and 85 shillings. At the point now it was reporting, the dollar had changed to about 130 thereabouts, not to show the exact figure. Those financial reporting standards required that the amount, the difference, the delta between the dollar at the point of borrowing of the loan and the repayment be reported, and that delta be reported in Kenya shillings. So that delta is 18 billion shillings.
Okay.
But remember, when KQ pays the government back, it pays from its revenues, and its revenues are in dollars. So there's no loss. So you pay the government in dollars, but the reporting has to capture that delta of 18 billion shillings. So that is that loss of 18 billion shillings is actually unrealized. Remember my analogy about the unrealized part of a loan when you sell a house, the difference between the value and the market, the value at the point of purchasing and the value at the point of selling. So that loss is unrealized of 18 billion shillings. It's a paper loss. It's not in the books,
So KQ didn't make any losses this year?
18 billion shillings loss was not made at all. It was just for
so 38 minus 18.
38 minus 18. But there was another further loss of about 8,000. Now that one was reported because that was on account of forex fluctuations. 1, 2, the fact that fuel went up by 160%. So that was there, about 8 billion shillings. So had we not had a question of that innovation facility where the government lent to KQ for payment, resulting in a paper loss of 18 billion shillings, and had we not had this other fuel differential between 2021 and 2022, then KQ would have turned a net profitability, a gross profitability of about 2 billion shillings. So KQ is not doing badly. The fundamentals are okay. Everything is okay. On paper, of course, basically on account of the reporting standards required, there's a loss of 38.8 billion. But in terms of operations, when you look at the operations, there's actually a drop in the operating losses, which is why the chairman and the CEO of KQ are very sanguine and by saying that KQ will become profitable, say, by 2024, 2025, and onward now to net profitability at some point in the not too distant future.
What is the last time KQ made profit?
Last time KQ made
paper or in bank, whatever it is.
Yes, that was that was around 2012 before we got into that expansion drive, the Mawingu expansion drive, and before we ran into headwinds for reasons that I had explained earlier: Ebola crisis, the war in Central Africa, the fact that the airport burnt down at some point, the Westgate crisis. And there was also that other crisis, a terrorist attack in Garissa. All those issues compounding, are the ones that precipitated the loss-making streak that KQ has undergone over the years. Yeah. And as I said earlier also, those issues created what we call legacy costs. So once those legacy costs are taken care of, then KQ returns to profitability instantly.
All right, Michael, what are your thoughts on the state of Kenya Airways?
I may sound a bit more pessimistic, but a few things to add on to what you said. I'm really happy that we are thinking profits in the near future. But I think the reality of African air travel, I'm not an aviation expert, so I look at this from a policy perspective. In terms of the African air travel, we have a fairly limited market, and KQ is heavily dependent on the African market. Secondly, Kenya Airways is facing very stiff competition from our neighbors in the north, Ethiopian Airlines. And if you are to look at the Ethiopian Airlines business model, it's more of almost entirely state-driven. And this is my point of argument, that the airline business in Africa, requires, if we have to remain in it, some of us have even thought in terms of, so why don't just let KQ go?
Usually.
Yeah, we know it is a strategic investment for the country, because Kenya Airways is not just a business; it is also a marketing strategy for the country. So if you look at it that way, then I think the government has to proactively enable KQ to operate the same way the Ethiopian government is doing. I'll give you an example. Bole International Airport is technically owned by Ethiopian Airlines. It is also technically managed by Ethiopian Airlines. What does that translate into? There are certain operational costs within the airport environment itself that constitute a very huge chunk of airline operational costs. And if you can find a way of reducing these costs at the airport point, I think that would be a very big advantage for Kenya Airways. I mean, I remember at some point Kenya Airways had even suggested to the government to, hand over the management of JKIA to KQ, which, in my opinion, would have been a good move because, I mean, if it has worked in Ethiopia, some of these things you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Look at what has worked somewhere. If it has worked somewhere, then try and do it in your case. The best airlines in the world today are Middle East airlines. How do they operate? Almost entirely state subsidized. Emirates is Dubai-based, Dubai-owned, Qatar. I think the Qatar government owns almost 50% of Qatar Airways, and that also comes in terms of subsidies, even in terms of fuel costs, and other operational costs. Back to the Ethiopian Airlines. Ethiopian Airlines entirely, or 100% owned by the state, but the state allows, the state as the sole owner, does not expect any dividends from Ethiopian Airlines. It allows the Ethiopian Airlines to reinvest all the profits into the airline, So technically you are competing with a neighbor that is, 100 steps ahead of you. And you are competing for the same market, the African market. The West African market, for instance, which was a very good revenue base for Kenya Airways. I fear to say this, but I think Ethiopian Airlines in a very short time will completely dominate the West African airlines. The West African air travel market. One of their strategies is purchasing or simply just buying the small airlines within Western Africa. Arik, for instance, is now owned by Ethiopian Airlines. In certain cases, they have also set up bases, hubs in West Africa. Lome, for instance, is technically a hub for Ethiopian Airlines. South Africa, we know the case about Malawian Airlines. So it's technically just chipping away a lot of the market that Kenya Airways for a long time has dominated. The partnership between Kenya Airways and South African Airlines may be a good thing if worked on well, but if you have two struggling airlines coming together, there may also be a sense of
that it's always a disaster.
Then the other thing I wanted to add, two things actually. One is the fact that the Yamoussoukro agreement on open airspace for the African continent. I mean, I've traveled a bit in the continent, and one of the things that a lot of these airlines face in the African continent is the cost of even flying into another country's airspace, the cost of landing in another country's airport. The African airspace is one of the most controlled in terms of access, and that comes at a cost, unless you have a bilateral agreement with a specific country, and that can be a challenge. So if we can go back to thinking of how we can actualize the Yamoussoukro agreement on open airspace for the African continent, I think that would also support not just Kenya Airways, but many other African airlines. At a regional level, if you look at the origin of Kenya Airways didn't exist until 1977. Previously, we had East African Airlines, which was an East African joint airlines between Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. The intent at that point was to create synergies, build synergies at a regional level. But now what we see is breaking up of those synergies. The Ugandans are coming up with their own airlines, the Tanzanians their own airlines, and this further chips away Kenya Airways market maybe if we eventually come to an agreement and find a way of building a much bigger airline at a regional level, the way we've started with the South African Airlines, I think that would be something that we can consider. But for me, I think two things. Kenya Airways is a strategic parastatal. It is not just, we don't just have to look at it as a business, that has to turn profits every time. We also have to look at it as a marketing strategy for the country.
A decoration.
And that means the state has to, yes, a decoration, aesthetics. That means that the state has to invest in Kenya.
Has to keep painting it.
Yes.
Looking in, I think there has been a concern.
Okay, sorry. I said Michael has actually stolen my thunder, so to speak. Sorry, because you've said everything that I wanted to say. So if let me just add, basically to what Michael has said, or maybe correct one or two misimpressions. The market in Africa is not a small market. Africa has the world's. Africa has 17% of the global population, but only 3% of the air travel market. Our market is huge. It means our market is huge, but it is untapped when it comes to air travel. And to give you a point of how untapped it is, most times when you want to travel, say to some parts of North Africa or wherever, you don't have a carrier that will take you directly from Nairobi, say, to Morocco or something. Sure. Sometimes you have to fly to Dubai, then to go to Morocco, fly to Switzerland, then go to Morocco, and that sort of thing. It tells you that intra-Africa travel is undeveloped, but not for want of passengers. It's undeveloped for the reasons that you're stating, because of restrictions. Every government controls its airspace very rigidly, so that it's not possible for us now to travel from one point of Africa to the other. We have to get out of the continent to come back. But that Yamoussoukro declaration that you've talked about, and specifically the resultant policy called SATAM, Single African Air Transport Market, SATAM, has come up to remove the barriers that exist between countries of the continent. Kenya is a signatory of SATAM. And right now we are one of the first beneficiaries of that SATAM, in the sense that now we have been allowed to fly to Accra, then from Accra to another destination, I think either in Cameroon or Senegal, I think in Senegal. We have been allowed to fly from Accra to Senegal to pick and drop passengers between those points. So it is increasing our traffic. It's increasing our footprint on the continent as an airline. It's a good thing. So the aviation market, as you're rightly putting it, has a lot of potential within Africa. I agree with you entirely that Kenya Airways must be supported by government as a strategic national investment, an asset of the government. And this is the value of Kenya Airways to the Kenya government that is never spoken of, even beyond headlines, negative headlines. Kenya Airways is an employer of 3,800 people directly, and another 18,000 people indirectly. These are all people who are paying tax. They're on the tax bracket, They are being taxed every month. Kenya Airways indirectly creates employment for another 500,000 Kenyans. That's a huge number. People who are employed, earn monthly, and are taxed. Not to mention the ones who go below the radar, Kenya Airways is a facilitator for Kina Mama Mboga, the ones who grow French beans, the ones who grow whatever. That whatever is consolidated and is sent out as a horticultural product. Our flowers, the cut flowers, and the flower farms that are there, whatever is consolidated and is sent out. A lot of it travels in the belly of Kenya Airways passenger planes. A lot of it travels as cargo, because we have now 2 dedicated freighters, and there's a possibility that others are going to be added on pretty soon. Kenya Airways contributes close to 5% of Kenya's GDP. Take away Kenya Airways, collapse it, and the ramifications are instant. First off, visibly, villages like Syokimau, villages like Embakasi stop existing. They become the equivalent of what the Americans call the Rust Belt. Where industries relocated in America and the entire towns died. So entire towns die. Yeah. All those captains who live in Syokimau, all those airline crew, the flower people, the people who handle logistics at the airport, who have created a satellite economy around the airport. Everything comes to an end if you kill Kenya Airways. So we must, as a government, continue investing in Kenya Airways as a strategic national asset. Then again, follow the Ethiopian model. We keep on comparing ourselves to our neighbor Ethiopia. As Michael has rightly said, Ethiopia is really supported by the government. And do you know why? Because the Ethiopian airline is the biggest consolidator of foreign exchange in Ethiopia. You take away Ethiopian Airlines from Ethiopia, the country collapses. It cannot meet its external obligations. It cannot import anything. It cannot meet its import needs because it doesn't get foreign exchange. That's why the Ethiopian government goes all out to ensure that airline is supported. Yeah, and one of the ways, of course, is in the fact that most of the employees of the airline, Ethiopian airline, come from the state. Yeah, either pilots or whatever. Their salaries are finite. As we pay globally competitive wages, which is a plus for us anyway. The fact that we can still pay globally competitive wages and still turn a profit or still...
Which profit? Leo.
Well, at least operationally, we are closing the gap. Operationally, we are closing the gap. And that is important to note. That we are competing with people who are so heavily subsidized, but we are still bridging the gap.
Yes, motivational speaking.
No. It's reality. Backed by figures.
Profit and KQ, they don't marry.
You see, that's the narrative that we have to change because Ethiopians don't have the same concerns about their airline. They work, they're patriotic, they love their airline, they support their institutions. But it's only Kenyans now whose mindset needs to change. For so long, we've been exposed to talk of corruption, this, corruption, that even when the truth is presented, it doesn't look feasible. It doesn't look, even when you're given good news, you begin to look for the catch behind the good news. But the thing is, this airline is turning around, but it needs state support. Michael has said one of the ways would have been to consolidate Kenya's aviation assets along the model of the Ethiopian airline, have Kenya Airports Authority under Kenya Airways, have the training facility under Kenya Airways, catering, have the ground handling services under Kenya Airways. If you go to Jomo Kenyatta right now, there are about 5 different companies that handle the ground handling. If you go to Ethiopia, it's only one company. If you go to the UK, it's probably one company. If you go to Dubai, it's only one company. And in most cases, those companies are owned by the national carrier. Yeah, I think Dubai has Dinata. Turkey has another one, I can't remember the name. Ethiopia has the same. But here you have Swissport, you have Kenya Airways itself, you have this Aerotech. Where if we consolidate those assets under one umbrella, Kenya Airways becomes profitable because these assets support each other. In any case, I think Kenya Airways would be better placed to operate a facility like JKIA more efficiently than Kenya Airports Authority themselves. If you go to JKIA, there are messes currently. You get long queues when you're coming through immigration. You get these carousels, the baggage carousels not working in some units. You get entry into the airport difficult. You climb stairs, you go down, you get into a bus, you're bused to the plane back. Instead of having a bridge, those are low-hanging fruit that could easily be fixed by the airline because the airline understands the importance of having a great passenger experience, and they can take up the facility, manage it, and balance off those revenues so that all the entities of that aviation company are profitable.
Well, the concern has been, so which one should swallow the other? KK is making losses. KA is making profits. Now you want the company that is making losses to swallow the one which is making money.
They are all national assets. Look at them as national assets.
Why not hand over KQ to KA?
Because KA is inefficient. KA causes KQ to lose a minimum of about 5 billion shillings every year on account of its inefficiencies. Yeah, it is just one monopoly that is making money as a result of being a monopoly, but it's not efficient. But you need to introduce private sector efficiency, because KQ is privately owned mostly.
So the problem with KQ is that it's refusing to compete. Now, let's look at it this way. The most expensive ticket, if we were to check now, on average would be KQ on one destination. And I mean, there's no explanation behind that. It's not like you get anything premium. There's no premium service. There's the planes are the same. For instance, if you fly KQ from Nairobi, JKIA to Dar es Salaam, and you fly Air Tanzania from JKIA to Dar es Salaam, the cost would be way off each other. Air Tanzania will be way cheaper than KQ. When it comes to service, if you're taking a business class on Air Tanzania and business class on KQ, those are two different worlds. In the sense that it's not like there's anything extra that you're getting from KQ. You're getting even more comfort from Air Tanzania, but you're paying more money for KQ. Now, KQ charges prime dollar, but makes the biggest losses across board. Where do this money go?
Now, let me answer you in... there are two valid questions that two valid points that arise from...
And how much experience from experience?
First off, it's not true that Air Tanzania will give you a better experience than KQ. Not at all, particularly not in business class. In fact, last year, for the year 2022, KQ got 4 travel awards. There were the World Travel Awards held, ceremonies held. KQ got 4 travel awards. Best airline on the continent and best business class.
Is it?
Yes. It's a fact. Google and
Is it experience best?
No.
Because of experience,
the business class is actually premium.
On KQ?
It's on KQ.
Versus
other airlines on the continent. Versus even Ethiopian.
You need to put me and Mike for free. You go and see business class, because actually I've had a very bad experience with KQ. Very bad one.
No, that is changing. I cannot discount the bad experience that you've had. Yes, there have been problems, but that is changing. The culture, the whole culture of organizational culture is changing. But now to your question about the cost.
Yes.
What people don't realize is that any travel from a hub, an airline hub, outward is always expensive. Why? Because it's a direct flight from the hub out. Jomo Kenyatta is KQ's hub.
Okay.
Any travel from Jomo Kenyatta outward on KQ becomes more expensive than others. If you go to Ethiopia, Bole is the hub of Ethiopian Airlines. Any travel from Bole outward is expensive. If you go to, say, Eastern Turkey, Istanbul, the new Istanbul airport is the hub. Any travel from the hub outward is expensive.
To Google.
Yeah. But I'll give an example. If I were to travel from Nairobi to Istanbul right now on Turkish Airlines, it's a direct flight from Nairobi to the hub, and from the hub back to Nairobi. It's a direct flight. It will cost me about $1,500. If I use Emirates to do the same destination, it will take me from Nairobi to Dubai. Then from Dubai to Istanbul, it will cost me about $670. Why the difference? Because it's not a direct flight from hub to destination or from destination to hub. Every airline prices their tickets in the same way. Then, why KQ prices tickets a little bit expensive sometimes? Ticketing is an art and a science at the same time. There are structures. There is a method behind the pricing of tickets. You have what you call the published fare, and I think the published fare, if I'm not wrong, is controlled by IATA, International Air Travel Association. So, say from Nairobi to Joburg, they'll tell you that the published fare is about, say, $1,500, and that's across the board for every airline. Then each individual airline, depending on what it wants to do, can have fares can give discounts on the published fare. And these ones are reflected in what you call the booking classes, A, B, C, and whatever. So you give discounts on those fares depending on the promotions that you're running when it's low season. Yeah, depending on the fact that maybe you don't have numbers and you're building a new route, so you give those promotions. Yeah, depending on the competition that you have on that route. Yeah. Now, when you have consistently full planes, and do you have passengers willing to pay to use your service because it's a premium service, it's giving you direct access to wherever you want to go, then you open you publish you open the booking up to the published fare. If there is competition and you see that your numbers are not adding up, that is when you begin to give promotions. But for the moment, KQ doesn't have competition in a lot of those routes. Our flights are perpetually full across every sector. It's a business like any other.
It's full.
It has to maximize. It has to maximize. Yeah. The money is there.
I'm looking on 21st April. If I was to fly from Bole Airport in Ethiopia, if on 21st April, Friday, like this, the 21st April, I would pay $371 one way from Bole Airport JKI on Ethiopian Airlines, and I would pay $376 on KQ. Yeah, difference of how many dollars? $5.
Yeah.
You seem biased, huh?
Yeah, it's neither there nor there. I mean, anything, even...
but that is flying from Bole.
Yeah, from Bole, yeah. There's a lot of competition between us. So on routes where there's competition, we also we try and match the competing airline. And it's across the board. All airlines do that.
But my only, sorry to interject, my only concern with Kenya Airways is, you can charge premium, yes, because I understand the logic of direct flight. It would be easier for me to fly Nairobi, Johannesburg on KQ.
Yeah.
It will take me just
4 hours.
4 hours.
That's the
maximum. Than fly Rwandair.
Yes.
It will take me back to Kigali.
With a long layover.
So it will take me 10 hours or more, So I understand that logic. But you see, for a customer that looks at things in terms of value for money, one of the bad experiences people have with Kenya Airways are actually delays. In certain cases, cancellations without notice. I remember I had a very bad experience one time when I was traveling on Kenya Airways. I was already on my way to the airport. Somewhere just before the security, at least they were good enough to send me a text. They sent me a text that the flight had been cancelled. That is just like 3 hours to the flight. And it's an international flight. It would make sense to let me know much earlier. So, dealing with the customer issues, so delays. 2 is baggage handling. One recurrent problem with Kenya Airways is if you're lucky to, particularly if you have a connecting flight, if you're lucky to arrive with your luggage on the same flight, you can thank God. But in most cases, the luggage will
go on holiday.
wrongly routed somewhere, or it will be left at the airport of departure, And these are things that customers look at. If you charge me premium and I get quality service, it wouldn't be as much of a problem. But if you charge me premium and the service is also lackluster, then there is a serious issue. And I think this is one thing that a lot of KQ customers constantly raise. I follow Kenya Airways, and oftentimes I see responses. On Twitter, in certain cases, people raise issues, they don't respond. They just and this is a service industry, and it is a service industry in a competitive environment where you have options. So if for one reason I don't get the service I need, then we're also losing out on that market, for Kenya Airways. So I think these are things that, in terms of management, in terms of customer care, these are things that the airline has to look at. Ethiopian Airlines, we say it's supported by the state. It may have its problems, but to a very large extent, it's relatively much more efficient than Kenya Airways, if I were to say so, and particularly based on my personal experience, Egyptian Airlines is another, though not a direct competitor because the markets, I think, are fairly different. May have its issues, supported by the state also, but it's relatively much more efficient than Kenya Airways. I mean, Kenya Airways probably is at the same class as South African Airlines, which is also very inefficient in its own way, So I think these are things that the airline has to address. Even as we talk about how do we sustain the strategic investment in Kenya Airways. But it cannot be carte blanche. It cannot be an open check that, now you can. And sometimes it comes with a sense of, sorry to say, but it comes with a sense of arrogance from the airline, probably because of the dominance and monopoly in quotes in certain routes, that sometimes they can just decide to ignore their travelers.
To behave the way they want. You see, unasikia feedback.
It's okay?
Yes, please come.
The culture has been changed. We appreciate your concerns. They have been raised. In fact, let me say the management, let me not say we, I'm just speaking as a consultant, an aviation consultant. But the management has, it has been appraised of these operational hitches, and they've taken action. I'll give you an example. About a month ago, the CEO put out a newsletter. And in that newsletter, he mentioned that he was acutely aware that customer service, the response to customer queries, the way customers were being handled was wanting, but they had invested in a software that would be used to respond to help people respond to customers more quickly, more efficiently than has been in the past. Then, of course, they had disruptions, particularly in the early part of this year, as a result of supply chain issues because of the war in Ukraine and Russia. A lot of components, aircraft components, come from Ukraine and Russia, because these components are made of titanium, and Russia is one of the biggest manufacturers of these components with titanium that comes from Ukraine. Because of the war, these crucial supply parts had been curtailed. The supply of these parts had been curtailed because of this war, and that had led to KQ aircraft going into service and then taking inordinately long to be serviced because of parts, then coming out late, interrupting the schedule of the airline. But that has now been resolved. I think airlines now, if you monitor KQ, you'll find that disruptions are infrequent now. They are not as common as they were before. And you'll find that rescheduling is not as it was before. Then you'll also find that on-time departures, takeoffs and departures and landings have improved. KQ now is beginning to keep time. Unlike before, where you would have delays of 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. That has been reduced, I think, to within 15 minutes, which is an internationally accepted standard. So those are things that are being worked on even as we speak. Yeah, and hopefully within about a year or so, those will be issues of the past. Yeah, the management is actually actively working, taking every feedback seriously. Yeah. Unlike in the past where you would get ignored. Yeah, and any issue of arrogance on the part of the KQ employees is handled from the inside. Disciplinary measures are undertaken. Yeah, no complaint is left unattended now. I think going forward, you'll see a totally different airline. You'll be getting value for money.
Amen.
Yeah.
Is there a call center at KQ as we speak now?
Is there?
A call center at KQ as we speak?
Yes, there's a call center.
There's a customer center.
There's a customer center.
Okay.
Yes. But now they've had the advantage, they've had added software to help them deal with customer concerns, so that you're not put on hold indefinitely. Or your calls are not picked up within the first 3, 4, 5 rings, They are more sensitive now to the needs of customers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, sir, what is the ownership composition of KQ?
KQ is 48.9% owned by the Kenya government, 38.1% owned by an entity called KQ Lenders Limited.
Who are these?
KQ Lenders are 5 banks, not 5 banks. Initially, there were 11 banks, local banks, by the way, who lent KQ money when it was going through the turbulence that it did between 2012 and 2017. The major banks like KCB and CBA at that time, NIC, Equity Bank, Chase Bank at some point, Cooperative Bank. I forget the others, top of the hat, but total at that time were 11. It has now come down to 9 because I think Chess was taken over, and then NCBA and CBA and NIC merged and became one company. So there are now 9 banks. So these 9 banks together at various points lent KQ about 25 billion shillings, and KQ was unable to service their debt to them in good time, so it was suggested that they have a debt equity swap. Yeah, so these banks agreed, and they now have a company called KQ Lenders.
So how many percent do they have?
That is 38.1%.
Ah, okay.
Then the other shareholders are KLM, Air France, who hold 7.7%. Then you have others, including KQ employees, and whatever is listed on the stock exchange, that comes to about 5.5%. So that brings it to 100%. Those are the owners of KQ.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but most of the time when you're speaking about losses and bailing out, we don't hear about those people. We only hear about the government and our taxes. They only come in when there's profits, or wanakuanga wapi wakati wa shida?
No, wako. I mean, the fact that the fact that there is a company called KQ Lenders Limited,
But they are lending.
that has lent KQ 25 billion shillings, means that they are there, they are visible.
Okay.
But the government is one that steps in most of the time because, of course, it's the biggest shareholder right now, and the government more than most appreciates the strategic value of Kenya Airways to this country. That's why you keep hearing the government. But let me also correct another impression. There's this impression that, government keeps on bailing out KQ year in, year out.
Yes.
It's as though KQ is a bottomless pit. They're just given free money and the money disappears. It never amounts to anything. First of all, it's not a grant.
Okay.
That bailout is not a grant. It is a loan that is repayable with interest. That is one. 2, the reason why you have these interminable bailouts year in, year out is because what KQ needs is about 3 billion USD.
Okay.
That's what it needs to capitalize, renew the fleet, and to retire the legacy debt. And that is the amount that it has asked the government to give it. But the government can't afford to give, obviously, because of the state of the economy, the government is unable to advance KQ the 3 billion that it needs to return to profitability, to net profitability. So what it does is it keeps on planning in bits and pieces every financial year to give bits of maybe 33 billion Kenya shillings, another year 40 billion Kenya shillings, another year take care of the debt that is guaranteed. So it gives you the impression that KQ is perpetually going to the government for bailouts. It is not. It is not at all.
Okay.
If it got the 3 billion USD, which is about 300 to 400 billion Kenya shillings, if it got that, it would recapitalize, it would retire legacy debt, and it would be operational. It would be profitable operationally and in terms of net profitability. And that's not a lot of money. Rwanda, it has sunk $2 billion US dollars in its aviation industry right now. They're building a brand new airport. They're renewing their fleet. They're doing A, B, C, and D. And if we don't watch out, they will eat our lunch. Saudi is investing 38 billion USD in a brand new entity, called, I think, Air Saudi or something like that. Yeah, it includes an airport, refurbishment of the existing airport, buying new equipment, and basically compete now, offering themselves up to compete with the other Middle Eastern carriers. Why am I mentioning these organizations? These countries rather. It's because they all see the strategic importance of having a national carrier. All these countries do, which is what Kenyans need to do, to see KQ with the same lenses that the Rwandese are seeing their national carrier. The Saudis are seeing their national carrier.
I think we're all seeing it. The difference is that those ones are making money and this one is not making money. But looking at it for what it is, the pride of having a national carrier, I think we all see that. But the question is, for how long is our taxes going to disappear into this deep hole?
But they're not disappearing. They're going to be repaid back with the interest. And let me correct another impression. We get the impression that these Middle Eastern carriers are perpetually profitable and they're making money. Qatar turned a profit for the first time since inception, operational profit, for the first time since inception. In 2021, it had never made profit. Emirates, the same thing. Okay, much earlier though, operational profitability. What is clear is that if they are looking for net profitability, they will never be profitable. Not with the amount of investment that has gone into those airlines. They will never be profitable. They can only be operationally profitable. But the governments of those behind those airlines look at the investment that those assets bring. Tourist numbers. In fact, I didn't even mention that KQ carries 56% of the passengers that are carried on KQ are tourists who come and spend huge amounts of money. The Saudis are looking at driving about 20 million passengers per annum. Istanbul, Turkey, the Turkish Air, supported by their government, is now driving about 66 million tourists through Istanbul every year. Can you imagine what would happen if we had an influx, say, of even just 20 million tourists coming into Kenya? This economy would change in an instant.
Right.
You'd never even have issues with foreign exchange.
As we remain optimistic. Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add on to something. The history of Kenya Airways cannot be complete if you don't talk about the partnership between Kenya Airways and KLM Air France. The partnership that started way back in 1995, 96, and I think until 2021. Was it 2021 or 2020?
Yes.
Officially was, and I think for me the issue that we really need to raise in terms of policy concerns is, you see, for a long time we had been made to believe that privatization works. You remember the structural adjustment programs of the 90s.
Correct.
Privatize, liberalize, roll back the state from the economy. The state has no business being in business. All those jargons around privatization. And I think Kenya Airways got into that
melee.
Yes, and in my opinion, it created some kind of a trap. But I think those almost 2 decades from 1995 to 2021, in my opinion, was a lost decade. Because the arrangement was, the partnership was in such a way that KLM benefited much more than Kenya Airways. Correct. In spite of the fact that we got the public impression that privatization for the first time was working in an African country because of partnership with a Western, European company. When in reality, I think the agreement was skewed in favor of KLM Air France. And it took a bit of time for us to understand that reality. By the time we were realizing that it was actually hemorrhaging revenue from Kenya Airways,
it was too late.
There were already many more problems that had already arisen. Take for instance, an accident for an airline is very significant. And it can really take you back many years. And I think Kenya Airways has had about 2 accidents. The Cote d'Ivoire one and the Douala one. And I'm raising this because when the accidents happened, it was Kenya Airways.
Yeah.
nothing about KLM. You know, so Kenya Airways took the bulk of the pressure and the losses out of that, including the name in itself, because customers, airline travelers are very sensitive to safety. I mean, you get involved in an airline accident, you most likely just die. If you're lucky to survive, then you thank God. So I think that arrangement is one thing that we really need to be cautious about. You know? Even as we talk about reviving Kenya Airways, in my opinion, any revival should never think in terms of privatization, because we know what that has led us to. It should think more towards how does the state understand this strategic investment, not just in terms of the profits it makes, but in terms of the overall economic environment that actually exists just because of this loss-making entity. You know? So that if you're computing benefits, let me not call them profits, if you're computing benefits derived from Kenya Airways, it should be benefits in terms of the backward and forward linkages with the economy, just by virtue of existence of that enterprise itself. So that profitability should then be in that global perspective, rather than the more mundane accounting and financial reporting annually, you know. But that does not negate the fact that you give Kenya Airways a blank check that now you can just continue making losses, you know, in spite of this. There must also be,
so they don't fear loss.
Exactly.
Anyway, we'll be bailed out.
They must create an environment in which the entity is seen as an asset, but also as a necessity, because in terms of not just hemorrhaging resources, but also these resources are being plowed back into the economy. I mean, in terms of the benefits that you get out of it.
That's right.
So I think privatization is good, yes, but the lesson we've learned from the KLM Kenya Airways partnership is that
it's not the best.
If you are partnering with a partner that has a much longer stick, you will always get the shorter end.
Correct. All right, 24 minutes past 9 a.m. As we want to remind you that kama wewe ni mkulima, if you are a farmer, ndio kama unaweka mifugo ya kesho, kama unaweza kuchukua chakula ya mifugo yako kutoka Fugo Feeds, kutoka East Africa, Unga Farm Care East Africa Limited. Ensure that you get your animal feeds from Fugo Feeds by Unga Farm Care East Africa Limited. Why do we tell you to get your feeds from Fugo Feeds? One is that the nutritional formulation has been done scientifically to ensure that it gives you the best production and also best health for your animals, and also it's aflatoxin free, so you can be pretty sure that your animals will be safe without any feed poisoning whatsoever. All right. Comments. Thank you, Michael Otieno, for a very health suggestion. Paul Koske, thank you very much. Leonard Khafafa for that objective analysis. Isaac Boss Buge is back. Good morning to you, Isaac Boss Buge. Karibu sana. You can wear a putolel. This guy is talking as if KQ started yesterday, even as he talks about parts delay. You mean to tell me there are no parts in KQ parts department to satisfy these breakdowns? Please ask him, when you order a plane, you also think or anticipate that the same plane will break down. Something is not adding up. Someone is supporting mediocrity. Well, okay. Pauline Cherab, good to see you. Good morning and good analysis to know some facts. Asante. Bernard Mwangi, kudos to the gentleman who is analyzing KQ. First time many years to hear one speaking optimistically about KQ. Check is earned for me. Question for him. Is he aware of the big modern airport Rwanda is developing and will open in 3 years' time? And how will that affect KQ's struggle to recovery? Two, former regime had started negotiation with South Africa Airlines to merge and dominate African market. How far is the deal going to ensure this come to fruition? John Gerald, good morning from this side. Nicola kama kawaida. Asante sana. Good to see you, Joan. I hope you're doing well. Bena Mwangi, is it possible companies of top families and have largely been accused of not paying taxes locally are actually registered in these tax havens countries the panelist is talking about? Could that be the reason the government decided to go political over instead of following proper procedure of recovering the unpaid taxes, since they cannot do anything about it by law? Okay. Kimbaito, good morning, Team Tackle. Please discuss the issues of increase of banking interest rate and impact on cost of living and general inflation. All right. Because of time, I think we go straight into recommendations. What is the turnaround recommendations for KQ? I mean, I'm just throwing you into the water, the fish, because that's how you swim best.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, what we've discussed here with Michael is to have government participate in the turnaround of KQ by pumping in more revenues. That is the best case scenario.
More money.
The 3 billion that we need to turn KQ around.
Okay.
You notice Rwanda is investing 2 billion. That 2 billion, part of it is going towards the airport. And like we've said, if we don't measure up, Rwanda will eat our lunch. Okay. So government needs to invest. The best case scenario is for government to invest the 3 billion so that we can retire the legacy debt, so that we can refurbish, we can renew KQ's fleet. Yeah, so that we can add to the fleet, so that we can cover more destinations. Best case scenario. And people have talked about looking for a strategic investor. Fact is, a strategic investor, even if they did come on board, they would never take up KQ's debt. Okay. That debt is guaranteed by the government. It's backed by a sovereign guarantee. It's ours. You get an investor, he'll just come, take your assets, make money out of your assets, and at the end of the day, you'd still be left servicing the debt of the government. So it's a zero-sum game. So for me, my opinion, best case scenario, as Michael has said, waongezewe tu pesa, wapewe ile pesa ambayo wanataka. It's a loan, it's not a grant. So it's not a bottomless pit, you're not bleeding. Yeah, it's a loan that is going to be repaid with interest. And as Michael has said, look at KQ as a strategic national asset whose value goes beyond a profit and loss account, goes beyond returns to the shareholders. Look at the broader picture. Look at the ecosystem of KQ. Yeah, and then look at the benefits that accrue from having that ecosystem. Look at it that way, and invest accordingly. Yeah.
Okay, all right. You're looking forward to seeing more money.
Of course, with caution. I think for me, there are even more subtle ways of the state supporting strategic investment like KQ. And I will keep going back to the example of Ethiopian Airlines. I mean, there are certain operational costs. They may look like they are simple, but they're quite heavy on airlines. You know, as I said, I'm not aviation expert, but I learned from a friend of mine that for an airline to use just the air bridge, it's so expensive. That's why sometimes some airlines would rather park in the open field and they use the stairs, which they still pay for. You know,
you also still pay for the stairs.
Yes, you still pay for the stairs, but it is a lot cheaper to use the stairs than to use the air bridge at the airport. I'm just giving that as an example. Added to that, the parking that the airline has to pay when the aeroplane is on the ground, because it's not free. You know, airport handling services that sometimes the airline has to outsource in certain cases from service providers within the airport. So my point is that there are so many subtle ways of supporting an airline to reduce its operational costs, so that you can begin talking about the profitability that we are mentioning here. And I think the state needs to look at these options. Strategic investor, personally, I would be very cautious, particularly given the experience we have had with KLM. So, and we always say once bitten, twice shy. So, who is this all good person that will come to bail out KQ if you yourself you can't bail it out? You know. So, I think we need to look at those opportunities for supporting the airline, even if it is not. If direct investment is too heavy, there can be other ways of supporting the airline to reduce its operational cost within that context. Then, of course, a bit of caution in bringing in a strategic investor for Kenya Airways. Thank
You would encourage that. All right, okay. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming in. Looking forward, of course, to see KQ turning around. Looking forward to a better experience, better prices, better flight experience, news in terms of profits. Very soon we are going to wait for profits. It's only 1 year to the next financial year. You say the next financial year you're going to be making money.
Correct.
So next financial year we want 2 year profits.
Correct.
It's coming.
It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. There'll be better news. Yeah.
Are you sure?
I'm 100% sure.
Okay. How much do you think we could make in the next financial year?
If we didn't have the fuel increase of say 160%, if we didn't have to report the paper loss, would have turned an operating profit of about 2.6 billion shillings this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to get it right, so operational profit is money before you start paying us our debts and everything else.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's operational profit.
So mnakuanga na pesa kabla mjaanza kulipa madeni.
Kabla tuanza kulipa madeni pesa ipo. KQ makes money. I mean, that's why the top line is good. Unakuwa na revenues, from sale of tickets, from cargo. Okay. That's the top line. Yeah. And it's always growing. I've given you numbers. Last year, the change from 2021 to 2022 was 59% increase in the top line. Bottom line hapa, of course, costs increased because of more flights and everything. But even then, we still narrowed the gap in terms of the operational loss that we were making. Yeah, so top line ni mzuri. Bottom line, we are doing everything operationally to ensure that there is operational efficiency. By next year, all factors held constant. Utaona profit, operating profit.
Billions.
Then after sasa itakuwa sasa story ya kulipa madeni.
Yeah. Vile mmetutesa na madeni inabidi mtupee kakitu. That's the biggest problem actually should be customer care. I'm also seeing another comment here from Pato Chio. They're saying KQ is always on loss here now. And they have the worst services. They delay you without apology. They sell your seat to the highest bidder and you book 3 months earlier. It's a shit airline. I'm a Kenyan, but I'm happy when flying Emirates when services are guaranteed. The biggest problem is customer service and giving value for money. As if you look around and get this feedback. I hope the company is taking notice of the complaints that are coming out, especially from customers.
That's why you see this is a service industry. Service industries depend on customer satisfaction.
Correct.
How you feel
taken care of,
I'll move to the next. And you see, when you have options, you don't even have to think twice about it.
Correct.
And particularly added to the fact that the ticket prices are also premium. Then you expect premium service.
Yes, if you want a service,
then you go to the next available option that is
that's right.
Listening to you.
So that's also you need to focus on that more. You can give us better experience.
I think
we are looking forward to flying for free with my brother Michael Leah. We have some few things we want to take care of. So in the interest of seeing if there's a new change in experience.
That Nini also, it's not a merger, by the way. That partnership with the SAA is going to be very good as well. In this sense, there'll be operational autonomy. KQ will continue to operate as KQ. SA will continue to operate as
South
SA.
African
airline. But there'll be certain shared benefits. One is economy of scale benefits, because when you come together as one entity called the Pan-African Group, when you're requisitioning for parts, you get massive discounts, because instead of taking your 40 planes, now you're taking like 150 planes, requisitioning for parts. Obviously, the discounts that you get are different from when your fleet is small. Then there'll be training, joint training. You have one facility or 2 facilities, but because you have mixed fleets, we have 787s, maybe they have 737s. They concentrate on proper training for 737s, so we send our people there, and they bring their people over here. So that training, you take care of training issues. Then there's what you call MRO. I think that's maintenance, repairs, and overhauls, which planes must undergo every so often. A plane is not like a car which you can drive for 8 months until you break down or whatever. You have to do routine maintenance every so often. After a certain number of flying hours, you have to maintain, and there are components that have to be replaced. So when you're doing that MRO, when you have 2 centers merging together, and you have that common MRO unit, then it reduces your costs of maintaining the plane. So operationally, that partnership will be very good. Then the market, because we tap, SAA has strength in different markets, say South America, or going all the way to Australia. It's easier to fly from South Africa to Australia. You can even have one long haul, taking you straight to Australia. Here we can't do it, So or Brazil for that matter. So we have passengers who want to go to Brazil. Usually they have to go use Emirates or some other airline. But if we harness those strengths, you have one code share. So you book Kenya Airways, flies to Johannesburg, transfer to SAA, and it takes you onward. And for them the same, because it is easier for us to access Europe or the Middle East than it is for them. So when you put together those two hubs, when you create those two hubs, and you merge them together into one operational group, then you have benefits for both.
There's more guys. We've had CALPA officials here before. But some of the things that they have raised, of course, was they mentioned that a number of assets in terms of flights are outsourced from other providers. So the money that is paid to those providers is on $1 as well. So what remains with the company is very less. They also mentioned that maintenance of these flights is also outsourced. I think zinaendanga nchi gani zinaenda zinatengenezwa. So a lot of ground engineers have been fired from that point. So it means that you're paying more money to maintain these flights or these planes outside than what you could be doing here. Another one would be, they mentioned mismanagement, a lot of money that get lost in between. I don't know how true that is. But yes, they had their day, they had their word. And maybe it's also some of the things that you need to look at. Nasikia mnakula mandazi sana huko, umesema huko, lakini wale ambao wako unasema kama mandazi sana. So those are the things they need.
Let me respond to that. CALPA have their own. I think they have overactive imaginations. Because when you talk of mismanagement, and you ask them to point to the mismanagement, from the time the present management and board took over, the CEO has been in office, I think, from 2020. He came in during the pandemic. And already, he's reduced the operational losses. How would you call that mismanagement? When you ask CALPA to point to specific incidences of mismanagement, they cannot. It's just an allegation. In a court of law, when you make an allegation, you must have evidence to back it up. You can't just make a wild allegation that is unsupported by any figures. But the management has figures. I mean, you can see year-on-year losses reducing. You can see the top line growing. You can see the bottom line reflecting positively as a result of operational efficiencies.
So CALPA is beefing.
CALPA is beefing. What mismanagement are they talking about? And you ask them that and they just look at you. They are blank. They don't have anything to say. What mismanagement? In fact, CALPA are one of the biggest problems of KQ. Because one, they are paid, like I told you, they are paid at par with the best of the world. If you look at a captain, say on a 787 here, a captain here earns about 1.6 million shillings. His counterpart in Ethiopian Airlines earns 800,000 shillings, exactly half. And it's across the board for these people who fly. Then when you look at the productivity of the Ethiopian pilot and the Kenyan pilot, the whole world of difference. Industry average for flying hours for airline crew, pilots, is usually about 75 hours thereabout. Ethiopian pilots fly 105 hours. Do you know how many hours our CALPA pilots fly on average? 45 hours. So their productivity is a third of what it should be. You look at the other allowances that they have been getting, even during COVID. They have what is called a mandatory layover allowance of $250 per night. Now, it means when you fly out of the country as a captain, any night out is counted as is paid an allowance. So if you spend 3 nights, You get 3 nights times $250 ideally. But CALPA have negotiated a mandatory allowance, a minimum, and that minimum is pegged to 10 nights out. Whether they fly or they don't, means every month the CALPA pilot, even if he has not worked, gets $2,500 extra on top of his salary. During the pandemic, when no planes were flying, they were getting that allowance in full. So they had a problem.
I think it would be interesting to have a conversation with you and a CALPA official.
Yes.
When you're ready to have that talk, will you let me know and get a CALPA guy to come here, head on head, head to head. We fix KQ once and for all.
That's right.
The Ruben Musyoki, can KQ open up in cargo carrier, that one department that can make almost 50% of income? Actually, more interest, all right? That has been it, gentlemen. Today, I'm sorry we will not be able to pick calls. It's 43 minutes past 9 a.m. We'll not be able to pick calls today. But I think we've gained enough value on what is going on at KQ. And also KQ has gained on the recommendations from us, customers. Tunalia kidogo machozi na taxpayers na pia our good brother has given recommendations on how best we can turn around KQ. But we're looking forward to seeing a more functional KQ. We will be very, very proud to see our pride of Africa, KQ, gaining its place again on the skies. And, doing us proud without getting into our pockets. Look forward to that. And at least when you start making profits, also remember us that we are with you in your bad days. Send us something.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Leonard, for coming in, and Michael as well for making that this morning. It's been a pleasure having you. David Taklo has been with us this morning. It's always a pleasure to have you. This has been a State of the Nation edition, being the Friday, an alternate for Sheria Wiki. Inakuanga Sheria Wiki, lakini lo lazima tuangalie State of the Nation, the 31st of March 2023. And it ends now. I'll see you again on Monday on the Common Sense edition. But until then, take care of yourself and have a very happy weekend. Bye-bye, and we love you.